Welcome back to Professor Andy Meir Faces the Future, a podcast where I take a topic from the worlds of transhumanism, philosophy and science to think through the questions we face and the answers we have that will get us through these remarkable times. You can find a text version of this episode on Medium, a platform for readers who love writing. A fascination for journalism and a belief in its importance has been a constant present throughout my career. My first direct experience of the power of journalism was felt at the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games, where I was able to secure media accreditation by simply having a website. I went to the Games mostly for scientific research, but found myself closely connected with the Olympic media. And back then, having a website was pretty unusual, so I think it came across as quite progressive to have one at all. And so the registration team at the media centre took a look at what I'd been doing online and gave me a pass. This experience sparked a huge amount of activity for me, not least of which was my first book for MIT Press, but on a much deeper level it spoke to me on the importance of societies supporting and enabling their citizens to assert their identities as media, and for this to be a critical component of a democratic and free society. By working within the Olympic Games media community and interviewing regularly for the world's media, I found a huge amount of common ground between what I try to do as a researcher and what journalists do as reporters of world events. Some of my favourite journalists perform the role of documentarist in their news coverage, and what's needed to undertake such works is pretty similar to what we do as social scientists, accessing worlds and trying to make sense of them. And the very best examples of this often feel quite like academic research outputs. For around 10 years now, my favourite podcast has been the design programme 99% Invisible. And the depth of research and insight that goes into each episode feels difficult to beat by any scholarly methods. It's the sort of show that makes me stop and wonder whether what we're doing in academia is the right way to go about the discovery and communication of new knowledge about the world at all. The same is true of another of my favourites, Laurie Taylor's Thinking Aloud, a BBC radio show driven by new findings from within sociological research. Laurie was also previously a sociology lecturer from Liverpool University, and this foundation is deeply wedded to the credibility of the programme. In this case, whilst it's clear that the show is discussing sociology rather than doing sociology, there's a point when the discussion of theories leads to new forms of knowledge about the subject, and this programme gets very close to that world. And so there's a common endeavour in the worlds of journalism and scholarship that I think is sometimes lost from our modern appreciation of their worth. Of course, there are major differences between much of what goes on beneath journalism we see, but there's also a great deal that we can learn from each other, I think, along the way. In my own research, I've sought to bring these two approaches closer together, and so the idea of where journalism is headed often preoccupies my mind. This was true especially in the last week when I saw a news story break from South Korea where a channel showcased the world's first artificially intelligent news reporter. This wasn't just an AI chatbot churning out news. It was a fully fledged digital avatar speaking on the screen, reporting the news as if it were a person. And it was even more fascinating because the character, the avatar of this reporter, emulated the appearance of their existing news anchor, looking every bit as realistic as a human being. There's so much to think about with this new kind of technological achievement, not least of which is what do we do about the growing realism of our digital world? It's always been a major trajectory of screen-based content to more closely approximate the real world. We've seen it in special effects, sound engineering, and so we shouldn't really be surprised that this is the end point of our efforts. As well, we're already treating our technology as if it's part of our family. We say good morning to our speaker systems to wake them up, and much of what we do within these environments is create a link to actual people through technology. So it's no surprise that personification is a big part of what we want from technology. It makes sense that the end point of this is the creation of emotional bonds with the operating systems that provide the scaffold for our lives. We know already that people can become attached to the objects in their lives, their mechanical companion species with which they share journeys, make memories, and develop attachments. While we might mock such feelings, they exist. We have them. We can feel lost if we can't locate our mobile phones because they feel like our connection to our wider world. And so the world's first journalist is another step in the direction of the collapse of the real. It's tempting to become distracted by the idea that this may be the end of the journalist as we know it, and I do wonder how this Korean news anchor feels about their digital equivalent. I also wonder what kind of expectation a journalist may reasonably have to retain some sense of ownership over the design and realization of their digital clone, or the intelligence that went into its creation and how closely it seeks to emulate the original version. I also wonder whether the rights of the journalist to retain a living wage may be jeopardised by their digital clone, and whether they might even secure two wages as a result, earning royalties from image rights perhaps. It's hard not to look at this technological achievement and think, first of all, that the days of the news anchor are numbered. But there's something deeper at the heart of this technology that we need to consider, and it goes all the way back to the origins of journalism as a social phenomenon. While we often get caught up in the recent past, journalism dates back centuries and may even be tied all the way back to antiquity. At its heart is a conviction that there is information that many people need to receive in order to better constitute societies. Of course, the mechanisms by which this is delivered have varied dramatically over the years, from authoritarian systems seeking to utilise journalism to advance propaganda, to citizen journalists who seek to champion the voice of the people. For the first of these, a free press jeopardises the capacity to govern. For the latter, a free press is a crucial component of a legitimate system of governance. But each is still based on the same principle, despite their vast ideological differences. Each values the capability of getting ideas out to a wide public. It's hard to imagine that this fundamental rationale is ever going to change within journalism, and many of the journalists I've worked with talk about themselves simply as storytellers, people who bear witness to the world's events and tell the stories of what happened. Some aspire to neutrality in the process, while others believe that neutrality is impossible and seek instead to guard against their biases by expressing them within their work and drawing attention to the impact they have on the stories they tell. And just to be clear, I don't think that what's produced by a state-controlled press is journalism at all. It often masquerades as journalism, and we can't often easily tell when such work is journalism or isn't. It also feels like the problem of detection is getting harder and harder as left and right-wing journalism blurs and as the channels of distribution become hybrid feeds of content mixing up genres and formats. Who doesn't look at every news story they see on Facebook and conclude either that none of it's true or all of it's true? This is a system that should breed a healthy mistrust in everything and hopefully a retreat to a more rigorous way of verifying information and a healthier practice of sharing such information. And I noticed this week on Twitter that they'll now warn users who try to share content they haven't actually read. They don't stop you, but they do say effectively, hey, it's a dumb idea to share something you've not actually read. How about you stop doing that? It's possible that artificially intelligent journalists will do many things to make better journalism content than humans, like write in a way that's more cognizant of the needs, interests, and communication preferences of diverse audiences. AI could tailor content to different kinds of people far more effectively. So you could, for instance, have a single written piece about a news story of the day being capable of translation or even rewriting into a number of different formats responsive to different levels of literacy or reading preferences. We see some efforts to do this on a really primitive level right now, but AI could make it far more effective. So for instance, if you don't have enough time in the day to read a newspaper, AI could reskin that paper into a far briefer digest. Or if you have a lot of time, it could add more detail, transforming a 1,000-word story into a 10,000-word extended read. Responsive journalism, as I'd like to call it, may become the best way to ensure we all are able to engage with daily issues regardless of our circumstances. So when I think about the future of journalism, I realise there's a lot of work that we need to do to ensure that it actually continues to exist. So much of the world's printed media is struggling to find new economic alternatives with the erosion of the printed paper. When I asked my university students when they last bought a newspaper, nearly all of them can't even remember, if indeed they ever have. It's clear that our habits of media consumption are working in a way that undermines the economic feasibility of investigative journalism as it's currently organised. We need to treat the media as we treat a public healthcare system. We need to find new ways to fund journalism to ensure that it can continue to speak truth to power and act in the public interest, regardless of its economic viability. I worry about a future in which the investigative work that underpins some of our most remarkable press organisations will be lost to the economics of social media, the kind of stuff that seems to occupy much of our news streams today. It's such a huge risk for societies to lose sight of critical, deep journalism, and while many of those social media organisations are beginning to act as news media outlets, we can't just leave it to the algorithms to determine what we encounter. We need curators, editors, guides, and people who are mindful of the needs for things to reach us that we'd rather not see, or which challenge our own opinions or perspectives on the world. And the problem we have is that we can't expect people to volunteer their cash for the creation of such content. For this reason, we need a greater sense of the public good to underpin the creation of journalism, or we risk losing sight of reality. And the consequences of this is not just widespread disorder and misinformation, but a complete collapse of our capacity to make history. Instead, we'll construct a sense of our world based on falsehood and lunacy. I think this is one of the major reasons for why there's been such widespread anxiety about the Trump administration over the last 4 years. Because politics aside, we need at least to ground our disagreements in sensible discourse, competing views about potential realities, as opposed to ideas that seek no relation to truth, and instead draw on the power of polemic to drive people towards behaviours that will support their selfish ends. It's the absence of reason that's the loss that many of us have felt over this period, and which leads the Mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, to say, "Welcome back, America." Not just welcome back to the Paris Agreement, but welcome back to planet Earth.